الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين وحبيب رب العالمين. I ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to grant us all the sincere intentions for His sake alone. Our Shaykh radiyallahu anhu emphasized that the knowledge of the religion is not taken by merely reciting books, merely reading books, for one to feel that they are broadening their horizons by just reading and acquiring and becoming cultured, and that this is the way to acquire religious knowledge. This is not correct. Some people even nowadays encourage this, religious speakers, Islamic speakers. They encourage people to read books, and they say that the first word that was revealed to Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam was Iqra. So they say this means read, so you have a license to read. So read, people. And this is calling towards ignorance. This is calling towards a person destroying themselves in the matters of religion. Because this, as you know, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was an-nabiyul ummi. And al-ummi, the scholars said that it means the one that cannot read and the one that cannot write. So when it was said to him by Jibreel, when he was ordered to Iqra, the scholars of who explain hadiths, they said that it means, and also the ayah of the Quran, they said it means prepare to recite, meaning after me, after Jibreel. Prepare to recite after me, as one of us would recite Tahsin. قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ. That's not reading, like to look at something and conjugate the letters together and read. So this is a call towards ignorance, to say that Iqra means read, so read books, O people. This is not the way that a person acquires the religious knowledge. Because a book that a person is reading might have something in it that was inserted into the book later on, even if the original author was reliable and trustworthy. There might be fabrications within the book. Likewise, two people might read the same book and understand. The person understands according to the way they think, evaluate, analyze, and then eventually conclude. And there's another person who has his own way of analysis and concludes things in another way. And both ways, both conclusions that have been reached might be contradictory to what the author intended. This is why when a scholar writes a book, he doesn't just write it and sell it to the shop and send it to the shops, to the printers, so that it can be sold. He teaches the book so that he can explain what he intended by the words that he mentioned. Obviously, his explanation, his verbal explanation, would be much more vast than what is written. Words have meanings. This is why they choose the words very, very carefully. And each word, it unlocks key cases, key masail. He used this word to include things, and he used this word to exclude other things. So it was very specific. Now, what if someone is not the author, and they are not a student of the author, or they are not someone who has a direct chain with the author in a way that they learned the book and they know what the author intended? Then they come with their limited understanding of the Arabic language, even if they were an expert in the Arabic language, but not an expert in the religious knowledge. How would they know what the author intended? They would not know. So 7 or 8 people could come together and read the same book and understand something completely different, all 7 of them, to each other, and also completely different to what the author intended. This is why when the scholar said al-isnad min ad-din, that the chain of narration that everybody should have before they say something, this is a huge part of the religion. Huge. Otherwise, anybody would have just said whatever they want. And this is what it comes down to. People read the books of scholars or the translation. See, as soon as you say translation, then already it's going to level down. Or already you've had another layer of it. So there's more of a probability now that a person would misunderstand. Knowledge is taken as was taken by the Salaf and the Sahaba. Most of the Sahaba, they did not write things down. Not that most of them were illiterate, no. But most of them didn't write things down. How did most of them learn? By continually listening to the religious knowledge. Attending gatherings of religious knowledge every single day, which is not the case for most people today. That's why it is advised, that's why even some of the Sahaba advised that you need to hold this knowledge down, you need to strap it down so it stays. Like when you go hunting and you aim at an animal and the animal falls. If you are complacent and you don't hold the animal down, you don't tie it down or you don't tie it up, then it will run away. It will become loose and it will go. Like that is knowledge. So Sayyiduna Umar radiyallahu anhu, the second caliph, advised that we hold knowledge down by writing it down, by recording it. So at least we can go back to it. So the knowledge of the Sahaba mostly came from attending gatherings of religious knowledge. And then verbally they would spread it. Some of them wrote knowledge down, but a lot of them did not. And so it's different for people today because they used to attend many gatherings of religious knowledge. Every single day they would attend gatherings of religious knowledge. So it's not an excuse for a person today to say, well, I'm not going to write anything down. Because the Sahaba, they learn by just listening. It's not the same thing. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Man yuridillahu bihi khayran yufaqqihhu fid din. Innama al-ilmu bit-ta'allum." He said, whomever Allah eternally wills something good for, Allah had eternally willed that he would be knowledgeable in the matters of the religion. And then he taught us how this knowledge would occur. He said, إِنَّمَا الْعِلْمُ, knowledge occurs by التعلم, occurs by learning. Ibn Sirin, the famous scholar, said, إِنَّ هَذَا الْعِلْمَ دِينٌ. This knowledge, it is your religion, your belief system, the rituals that you perform. This is this theory, which is the knowledge. This is what translates into your religious acts. فَانظُرُوا عَمَّنْ تَأْخُذُونَ دِينَكُمْ. So look thoroughly, search, find out who this person is. Find out who the person you're taking the knowledge from, who this person is, where have they taken knowledge from. Al-Hafiz Muhammad Murtada Zabidi said, واستماع العلم النافع. He said that listening to beneficial knowledge في الآخرة, for the hereafter, أفضل من اشتغاله بالنوافل من الصلوات. He mentioned that for a person to acquire beneficial religious knowledge, this is better for him than to pray optional prayers. This doesn't mean don't pray optional prayers. It is saying that a person should give time to the religious knowledge too, because this is better. Abu Dharr radiyallahu anhu narrated that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said to him, "O Aba Dharr, لأن تغدو فتعلم آية من كتاب الله خير لك من أن تصلي 100 ركعة." O Aba Dharr, for you to go out in the morning seeking to learn, and then going actually to learn, and the meaning of an ayah of the Quran is better for you in terms of reward, it's better for you than the reward of praying 100 nafal rak'ahs. The meaning of one ayah of the Quran. وَلَأَن تَغْدُوَ فَتَعَلَّمَ بَابًا مِنَ الْعِلْمِ عُمِلَ بِهِ أَوْ لَمْ يُعْمَلْ. And for you to go out and learn a chapter of knowledge. A chapter. Whether you then practice it or not. So you learn a chapter of knowledge, whether you implement it or not. خَيْرٌ, that actual learning of that chapter for the sake of Allah. خَيْرٌ مِنْ أَن تُصَلِّيَ أَلْفَ رَكَعَةٍ. It's more rewardable for you than performing 1,000 rak'ahs of the nafil prayer. So the reward of acquiring the religious knowledge is immense. One chapter of knowledge is like learning the chapter of the invalidators of wudu, or learning the obligations of wudu, or learning the integrals of the prayer. Each one of these is an independent chapter. So just learning one chapter of knowledge is more rewardable. This shows the great status of the religious knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ said, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ, narrated by Al-Bayhaqi. That it is an obligation for every person, every Muslim person, every accountable person. Every person must acquire a certain amount of knowledge. He sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Man kharaja fi talab al-ilm fahuwa fi sabilillahi hatta yarji'." The one who leaves his house, even if they don't go to another country to learn, like you came today, like we all came today to this lesson. The one who leaves his house seeking to learn religious knowledge, then this person, the Prophet said, is like the one who fights for the sake of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala until he returns home. There is an immense reward in this. An immense reward. As for now, the intellect, which is what I wanted to speak about today. The intellect is a blessing from Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. What is the intellect? What is the intellect? What is it?
The reasoning of the mind. The reasoning of the mind.
Is it? What is the intellect? Is it a... the creation, you know what it's made up of? It's made up of volumes and the attributes of these volumes. Right? So what's the smallest thing that exists? Al-Jawhar al-Fard, which is what? The indivisible particles. So small that you cannot even see it. Fine. So that occupies a space. Even though it's really small, it occupies a space. Fine. That's one type of creation. Lots of them, when they come together, trillions and trillions and trillions of them, they make this. Right? Billions and billions and billions of them would make a glass of water. The water inside. It's also made of indivisible particles. They're like the building blocks. Okay. Then you have the attributes of bodies. Right? Like colors and textures. Fine. So what is the intellect? Is the intellect of the first type or is it of the second type? Is the intellect a palpable volume or is it an impalpable volume? Or is it not a volume altogether? The scholars differed about this. They said that al-aql, our Shaykh radiyallahu anhu, he mentioned that al-aql It is an attribute of a body. And it is the ability or the strength, if you will, that occurs when a person necessarily comes to know things. Then with this ability, a person can deduce. A person can draw conclusions. A person can, through their thought process, decide things. This is the intellect. Where is the intellect? Where is it? If I was to say, where is your sight? You'd say you would see by the eyes. Where is your intellect?
Mind.
Is it in the mind? See, you're asking there. So, where is the intellect? Allah revealed in the Quran, لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ يَعْقِلُونَ بِهَا, that the people have hearts with which they reason intellectually. So the origin of the intellect is the heart. But it does have a connection with the mind. It does have a connection with the mind. Allah revealed in the Quran, in Surah Al-Hajj, part of Ayah 46, لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ يَعْقِلُونَ بِهَا. There are people who reason intellectually with their hearts. Or rather, they have hearts with which they reason intellectually. So although the intellect is in the heart, it does have a connection with the mind. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned, أَوَّلُ مَا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ الْعَقْلِ. Among the first things that Allah created was the intellect. So not the first thing, not absolutely the first thing, because we know that is water. Water is the first thing that Allah Ta'ala created before anything else. And this is according to Sahih Hadiths narrated by Ibn Hibban in his Sahih, and also narrated by Al-Hafiz Ibn Hajar in Fathul Bari, and he judged that hadith as either Hasan or Sahih. As for what some people claim, that the nur of the Prophet was the first of creation, alayhi salatu wasalam, then this is a lie. This is a fabricated hadith. And it is not correct to say that there's a valid difference of opinion between the scholars about this hadith. This is a lie. This is against the rules of the religion. The first matter Allah created is not what they refer to as the nur of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. This you will not find in the Sahih books of narration. You will not find this in the Sahih books of narration. And there are more details to this issue. It's very, very easily, this argument is very easily defeated. The argument of saying that the first thing Allah created was the supposed nur. Allah praised the use of the intellect in the Quran. In many places in the Quran, Allah revealed, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Do you not reason intellectually? Or use your minds, use your logic. For example, in Surah Al-Baqarah, part of Ayah 44. And then Surah Al-Baqarah, Ayah 76. Surah Al-An'am, Ayah 33. Surah Al-A'raf, Ayah 169. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Surah Yunus, part of Ayah 16. Again, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Then also in Surahs Hud, Yusuf, Al-Anbiya, Al-Mu'minun, Al-Qasas, and As-Saffat. So in all these surahs, Allah revealed, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Don't you use your intellects, don't you use your minds. So this is obviously a blessing from Allah, an endowment from Allah. And the use of the intellect is something that is not only is it normal, but it's praised. It's praised. And also Allah revealed, أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ. So أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ and أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ. So this as well. In it also is a praise of the intellect. When it comes to the attributes of Allah, as you know, some people nowadays take these attributes literally. They say we have to believe in their literal meanings. And this, they end up by that making the Quran seem contradictory. They say we're not allowed to use the intellect, but we have to take these verses in which things are attributed to Allah literally. And by that, they deny the permissibility of using the intellect. The people of hell will say, as Allah revealed, وَقَالُوا لَوْ كُنَّا نَسْمَعُ. The people of hell will say, as Allah revealed in Surah Mulk, or Al-Mulk, they will say, had we listened with an open heart, لَوْ كُنَّا نَسْمَعُ أَوْ نَعْقِلُ. And, sometimes in the Arabic language, أو can mean and. أَوْ نَعْقِلُ. And had we used our intellect in the proper way, مَا كُنَّا فِي أَصْحَابِ السَّعِيرِ. We would not have been among the people of hellfire. Had we just used our minds, obviously in accordance with what is in the Quran. The Quran comes first. Some people, they tell a lie, a wicked lie about the Muslims, about the Ash'aris. They say these guys, they use the intellect before the Quran and before the Hadiths. That's a lie. The Muslims, they of course hold the Quran in the highest regard, and it comes first. And Allah created the religion of Islam as such that everything that is in the Quran is in compliance with the intellect. It makes sense. But the Quran obviously comes first. So we are allowed to use the intellect. Not only are we allowed, sometimes it becomes a must to use the intellect. An example of that is that in a hadith narrated by Al-Bukhari and Muslim, from the route of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam said, ينزل ربنا تبارك وتعالى كل ليلة إلى السماء الدنيا حين يبقى ثلث الليل الآخر. He said alayhi salatu wassalam these words, ينزل ربنا, to the lowest sky when the last third of the night remains. So he said, ينزل ربنا, to the lowest sky when the last third of the night remains. يقول, then it is said, من يدعوني فأستجيب له. Who will ask Allah so that Allah would answer? من يسألني فأعطيه. Who is going to request something so that Allah would give them? من يستغفرني فأغفر له. Who is asking for forgiveness so that Allah would forgive? So in this hadith, some people, those who liken Allah to the creation, they say that these words, this word yanzilu, they say you cannot interpret it to mean anything than the most apparent meaning. The most apparent meaning of yanzilu, this is a present tense verb in the Arabic language, the most apparent meaning, or even the literal meaning if you will, is to descend. To descend. So they say yanzilu rabbuna, and they even translate this as our Lord descends. Wal-'ayadhu billah. Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah are in agreement that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala exists, and exists without a place, because He is the one that created all places. He is the one that created all places. So if someone comes now and they see a hadith and they say, well, this thing that has been attributed to Allah, if we want to translate it, or not, even in the Arabic language, they say we have to take it for its most apparent meaning. Yanzilu Rabbuna. Now, why is it that in the Arabic language, I can say and you can say, Yanzilu Rabbuna? Very confidently, we can say, Yanzilu Rabbuna. It's because we interpret the meaning to mean other than descending. We can say, because the Prophet said it. He said, alayhi salatu wasalam, yanzilu rabbuna. But those people, when they say yanzil, they actually mean to descend. And when they translate it, they say, Allah, wal-ayadhu billah, descends. This necessitates that they believe that Allah is in the sky or above, just above somewhere, and that He moves. Now, the scholars also mention quite clearly that attributing al-intiqal, an-nuqlah, movement, mobility, to Allah is kufr. And there are many places where this is cited, many places. For example, At-Tahawi mentioned, just At-Tahawi alone is enough. He said, whoever attributes to Allah an attribute of a human being, Man wasafa Allah bima'nan. Whoever attributes to Allah an attribute, min ma'anil bashar, among the attributes of the humans, faqad kafar. That's it. It's kufr. Then you have people nowadays coming and saying, oh no, we can't make takfir on this person. Wal-ayadhu billah. Saying, and what takfir means is for someone to call another person a kafir. Right? Sometimes it's a must, it's a duty upon every Muslim to call the one who commits kufr a kafir. Right. If it's a tricky case where, they're not really sure because it's not related to the core meanings of the two testifications of faith, then we'd say, go ask a scholar. Or go ask someone who has more knowledge. Go ask them, what is the judgment? But if it's related to the first testification, La ilaha illallah, the meaning of God, the 13 attributes. If it's related to that, like if someone says, Allah is jahil, Allah is ignorant, right? If a person hears that, they have to believe in their heart, this is kufr. Let's say they don't say anything out loud to that person, but in their heart they have to recognize this as kufr. Otherwise, if they don't recognize this as kufr, then how are they a believer? Because they've contradicted the first testification of faith. They don't actually believe that Allah is God, because one of the attributes of God that is absolutely necessary is that He is all knowledgeable. So if someone says, oh, this person said God is ignorant, I'm not sure how to judge him. Well, this person is also non-Muslim now. And this isn't something new. This is not something new. For over 1,000 years, the scholars have spoken about these issues. Okay? So, if somebody says, well, look, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, يَنْزِلُ رَبُّنَا تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى. Al-Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, in his book An-Nawadir, he said that whoever believes that Allah is a body, whoever believes that Allah has a shape or a size, whoever believes that Allah is in a place, this is the meaning of jism. Whoever believes this, he said, فَهُوَ غَيْرُ عَارِفٍ بِرَبِّهِ. He doesn't know his Lord, وَهُوَ كَافِرٌ. Then you have people coming and saying, oh, you, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, saying there are 300 things that you need to look into first to see, if it ticks all the boxes, then you can say he's a kafir, otherwise not. Well, what is that? If a person's tongue slipped, then they'd be excused from the judgment of having committed kufr. If someone, for example, lost their mind, fine, also, they would be excused. If somebody was threatened with being killed and they believed that the threat was imminent and then the one that carried it out, the one that made the threat would carry it out, and they said these kufr words, it wouldn't be kufr on them. There are a few excuses like this. But by saying that there are 300 things that you need to look into before making takfir, this is a scare tactic. This is a scare tactic, and this opens the door for all of the misguided groups to say what they want, or to say almost everything that they want, and a person would say, oh, but you know what, you're still Muslims. Because we want to unite the ummah. We don't unite the ummah upon kufr. We go back to the sayings of al-mutaqaddimun. The mutaqaddimun are the scholars of the past, the early scholars of the past. And they judged the one who said that Allah is in a place as a non-Muslim. Even if someone was to say Allah is up, and they pointed, they made it clear that they believe Allah is in a place, they said, well, this means that it necessitates that they believe Allah is a size or a shape. Even if they didn't say it, they called him a kafir. So, back to the hadith then. ينزل ربنا تبارك وتعالى. We cannot say about it, we cannot explain this hadith by saying Allah descends. Of course not. Because that would mean he'd be a shape, he'd be a size, he would have to be attributed with movement, and these are all things that he created, tabaraka wa ta'ala. So how do we explain this hadith? And it's in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. The best thing that we can do is not for me, for example, to explain according to my opinion or someone according to their opinion. The best way to explain a hadith is with another hadith. Who better than to explain a saying of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam than the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam? Like Al-Hafiz Al-Iraqi, he said in his Alfiyah, that he compiled in hadith sciences, he said, وَخَيْرُ مَا فَسَّرْتَهُ بِالْوَارِدِ. The best thing by which you can explain something warid, a hadith that's been narrated, is by using another hadith that has been narrated. So, An-Nasa'i in his Sahih, he mentions this hadith with a slightly different wording. He says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ, that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُمْهِلُ حَتَّى يَمْضِيَ شَطْرُ اللَّيْلِ الْأَوَّلِ. That after the first part of the night passes, or the first part of the night, yani Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala has eternally willed, yani He allows for the first part of the night to pass. ثُمَّ يَأْمُرُ مُنَادِيًا يُنَادِي. Then the order of Allah comes to a caller, an angel. And this caller calls out, هَلْ مِن دَاعٍ يُسْتَجَابُ لَهُ. Is there anybody making dua so that his dua would be answered? وَهَلْ مِن مُسْتَغْفِرٍ يُغْفَرُ لَهُ. And is there someone who is asking for forgiveness so that he will be forgiven, and so on. So here the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam explained what happens in the last part of the night by saying that the order of Allah comes to a munadi. A munadi is someone who calls out, or something that calls out. And it's obvious that this is an angel. So the best thing to use to explain a hadith is another hadith, like we've done on this occasion. Rather than to ignore this hadith, the second one, and say, oh, Allah comes down. Because intellectually, we spoke about how the intellect is praised. Intellectually, it doesn't make sense to worship something that has a shape or a size or that moves. Because someone then might say, well, I have a shape, I have a size, and I move, so why don't I deserve to be worshipped? If someone says Allah descends, then I also descend. I go downstairs and upstairs all day. Then why is it someone might say that Allah, or this thing that they call Allah that comes up and down, why is it that it deserves to be worshipped and I don't deserve to be worshipped when I'm exactly like it? Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala deserves to be worshipped because He's nothing like us. So if we follow this, if we use our intellects, it makes sense to us. And remember, we always talk about this, so it needs to be really, really well understood. That something that has a shape and something that has a size, it did not create that, it did not mold that shape for itself. It couldn't have, because it didn't exist. How could it have existed before itself to mold itself? It didn't exist. So it means that there is, and we know it's a creator, that gave it this shape, and gave it this size, and gave it these attributes. Okay? This means what? That the thing that has a shape and a size is in need. That's the key word, it's in need. And need is associated with a word beginning with W. What? What is need associated with? Weakness, exactly. So if someone says Allah is in the sky, that would mean he's in a place, he's a shape and a size, hence he is in need of the one who gave him the shape and the size, hence he is weak, and we do not attribute, and we do not worship that which is weak. Hence, either someone would say, well then we don't worship Allah. Or someone would say, no, we worship Allah, but we don't worship that thing that these people are claiming is Allah, because it's weak. Okay? And also, Al-Imam Malik, it's thought that he didn't hear about the second hadith. You see the second hadith that was narrated by An-Nasa'i? Al-Imam Malik, it's mentioned about him that he did not hear about this hadith. Okay? Or he might not have judged it to be strong, but it's a sahih hadith. So what did Al-Imam Malik say? Al-Imam Malik said that it means that ينزل ربنا يعني ينزل أمره, that the order of Allah descends. Not that Allah is in the sky and that He orders and then the order comes down. No. That the order of Allah descends, like from the Lawh al-Mahfuz, from the guarded tablet. So Malik said this. Now the saying of Malik here, it's not relied upon because of the presence of the Sahih Hadith, right? But who recorded this? Al-Dhahabi, the student of Ibn Taymiyyah, who was also among the people that likened Allah to the creation. He narrated it in Siyar A'lam al-Nubala, a big book that he has about the different personalities, Islamic personalities. In it he mentions it, and remember he's among the people that the Wahhabiyah use as a reference. He's a student of Ibn Taymiyyah. But even he said now, because remember the Wahhabiyah would call us kuffar, they'd call us non-Muslims for saying Allah doesn't descend. They wouldn't have a problem in that. So for them, even for someone to acknowledge interpretation of such a hadith, even this for them is kufr. Because they say at-ta'wil ta'til. To interpret, to give something a non-literal interpretation, something that's attributed to Allah, an attribute. To give it a non-literal, because they want to be literal, to give it a non-literal interpretation, they say this is kufr. They say you haven't believed in the text. So, what did Al-Dhahabi say? Al-Dhahabi said that it's as though he doubted about its authenticity, its attribution to Malik, that the order of Allah descends. And so Malik made ta'wil. Malik didn't say Allah descends, Allah comes down. He said the order of Allah descends. So Al-Dhahabi said that the hadith, its chain is slightly problematic, but he said, but if it's correct, if the hadith is strong, then Malik has two sayings. Malik has two sayings. One saying is that Malik says that just believe in it how it is. Believe in it without attributing how to Allah. That's one saying. Okay, at-ta'wil al-ijmali. And the second saying would be that he says that the order of Allah descends, meaning he accepted for there to be two sayings of Malik. So either now, what's his name? Either Al-Dhahabi is saying that Malik is correct in having this second saying, and hence the Wahhabiyah would have to call him a kafir for that, or he is saying that or he's saying that this particular saying, it's a valid one, that you can actually make it. Either he's saying Malik is allowed to make a ta'wil, and therefore they would have to call him a kafir by their own standards. Or at the same time, he is saying that it's permissible to give a non-literal interpretation. In both cases, In both cases, they would be wrong. Either they call al-Dhahabi a kafir, or they say, well, look, he acknowledged what Malik did. So according to you, where do you go? So it doesn't matter about, sometimes they complain about it and say, well, no, the narration is not correct. It's not being narrated from Malik. It's not an authentic chain. It's not. But al-Dhahabi recognized it. He said, well, Malik has two sayings. He accepted the permissibility of making a non-literal interpretation. One more thing that I wanted to mention quickly is the ghadab of Allah. The ghadab of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. Al-Imam Abu Hanifa radiyallahu anhu said, وَغَضَبُهُ وَرِضَاهُ صِفَتَانِ مِنْ صِفَاتِهِ تَعَالَى بِلَا كَيْفٍ. This word kills them. بِلَا كَيْفٍ. That the attribute of Allah, which is His ghadab and His rida, these two, he said, are attributes of Allah, the Exalted, Ta'ala, bila kayf, without a how. Without a how. Allah doesn't have a how. Allah doesn't have a manner of being. So ghadab is not to be translated as the anger of Allah. Allah is not attributed with anger. He created anger. Likewise, it's not to be said about Allah that Allah is happy, because this is an emotion. Who mentioned this? Some people hear that because they're so used to listening to filth. They're so used to, subhanallah, hearing things from ignorant people that they don't know that the scholars spoke about this at length. For example, Al-Qadi Iyad Al-Maliki, in his explanation of Sahih Muslim, said, غَضَبُ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ وَرِضَاهُ يَرْجِعَانِ إِلَى إِرَادَتِهِ لِإِثَابَةِ الْمُطِيعِ وَمَنْفَعَةِ الْعَبْدِ وَعِقَابِ الْعَاصِي وَضَرَرِ الْعَبْدِ. He said that the attribute of ghadab, it returns to the will of Allah. He said the attribute of ghadab and rida, so not anger and happiness, but ghadab and rida, these two attributes return back to the attribute of Allah, which is His will. In the case of rida, His will to reward the slave. This is the rida of Allah. The will of Allah to reward the slave and to benefit the slave. And the ghadab of Allah returns to the attribute of will, which is the will of Allah to punish the slave, punish the human being. And finally, As-Suyuti, he said in Ad-Dibaj, which is his explanation of Sahih Muslim also, Al-Hafiz Al-Mujtahid, Abdul Rahman As-Suyuti. He said, because there's this hadith, إِنَّ اللَّهَ غَضِبَ الْيَوْمَ غَضَبًا لَمْ يَغْضَبْ قَبْلَهُ مِثْلَهُ وَلَا بَعْدَهُ مِثْلَهُ. About the Day of Judgment, that the Prophet ﷺ said, what some people falsely translate. They say that the Prophet supposedly said, today, on the Day of Judgment, that Allah has become so angry, a type of anger that He's never been seen to have been angry like it before, and never will He ever be seen later on to be that angry afterwards. Whoever attributes anger to Allah, which is this emotion, this is kufr. This is kufr. Al-Hafiz As-Suyuti, why do you think these scholars, they went out of their way to make this point? That it means the punishment of Allah. Ghadab of Allah means the punishment of Allah that He inflicts. Why would they go to the extent to explain this if they didn't fear that many people would misunderstand? He said, Inna Rabbi ghadib al-yawma, that the Prophet said, indeed, Allah on the Day of Judgment, yaghdab. He said, al-muradu min ghadabihi, the meaning of the ghadab of Allah, ma yadhharu min tiqamihi, what becomes apparent on that day of the punishment that Allah inflicts, wa alimi iqabih, and the painful punishment that Allah inflicts upon people, wa also wa ma yushahiduhu ahlul jam'i min al-ahwal, and what the people see the astonishing situations and scenes that people will see on the Day of Judgment. He said that this is the interpretation of the ghadab of Allah, the punishment of Allah, and not anger. And he explained why. He said, لِاسْتِحَالَةِ حَقِيقَةِ الْغَضَبِ عَلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. That I've interpreted it this way because it's impossible that real anger, حقيقة الغضب, which is the emotion, right? The blood boiling and so on. He said, because it's impossible that حقيقة الغضب, that actual anger would be attributed to Allah. Then there are people, subhanallah, who are in the positions of being imams, they're in the position of being community leaders, religious leaders, in the masajid, and they might use these words, right? They might use these words and say, well, I didn't mean that Allah Ta'ala is attributed with an emotion. And they might actually believe that, yeah, Allah is not attributed with the emotion anger. But they use this word anger in a room full of people, 60 or 70 people, laymen, like us, but people who more, they're not well tuned in with the religious knowledge. How can you guarantee that all those people will understand the word anger as you understand it, i.e. that Allah is not attributed with an emotion? This is not permissible anyway. Even if a person says that, no, I have the correct understanding that Allah doesn't have an emotion, but I'm still going to say anger, he's still not allowed to say it, because this meaning doesn't occur in the language, in the English language, at least as far as I know. And even if it did, most people, when they hear that, if they hear Allah is angry, they're going to imagine emotion. And if they believe that, they fall into kufr. So where is the mercy? But some people, they just have this shahwa, they have this desire to seem academic, to use big words, to use words that others might not dare to say, and then say, oh well, no, you can use this in the English language. Well, what about the people? What about the people who just understood you and say the anger of Allah, for example? You made them commit kufr. At the expense of what? Your academia, your scholastic nature. Wal-'iyadhu billah. So Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is not to be attributed with emotions. People sometimes say, doesn't Allah say in the Quran that He loves? Allah mentioned in the Quran mahabbatullah. Inna Allah la yuhibbul kafirin, for example. وَأَلْقَيْتُ عَلَيْكَ مَحَبَّتِي, for example. Allah didn't mention love. Mahabba, for the person who has learned properly, they know that mahabba, when it is used in the Quran about Allah, it means the acceptance of Allah. Mahabbatullah, ridallahi wa qabuluhu. It means Allah accepts. It doesn't mean love. Why are people obsessed with this word? Many people obsessed with this word love when it comes to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Allah is not attributed with emotions. I remember the first time I mentioned this to some people, they were astonished. They said, how? Because they'd never heard it before. That you shouldn't say about Allah that He loves, because love is an emotion. Say Allah accepts such and such. So we don't use love about Allah, that Allah loves something, or Allah hates something, or that Allah is excited or amazed or worried or sad. All of these are attributed to human beings. And the scholar said that al-infi'alat, which are emotions, are not to be attributed to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Even rahma, which might be translated as mercy, even mercy when attributed to Allah is not an emotion. It means the will of Allah to bestow. Rahmatullah, it means the will of Allah to bestow something good upon a person. That's what rahmatullah means. We say rahimahullah. Someone says that it means that Allah has mercy upon such and such. It doesn't mean mean that Allah feels sorry for a person, or that Allah is in love with a person, or that Allah warms towards someone, or no. This word, it means that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has willed something good for a person. This is rahmah. Like when we say, may Allah have mercy upon you, may Allah have rahmah upon you, it means may Allah will something good for you. May Allah ease your situation. That's something good for you. May Allah grant you what is better for you. That's rahmah. That's something good for you. Allah eternally willed that you would be bestowed, that something would be bestowed upon you. That's something good. But this is a lesser issue. This is people don't understand, as far as I know. Many people don't understand from the word rahmah, from the word mercy, that it means, that it could mean an emotion. But if somebody does understand that it means an emotion, then obviously this person would not be a Muslim. But it's not like using the word anger or using the word sad about Allah, wa la'ayadhu billah. The judgment in that is much clearer. Much, much clearer.
Another meaning for love other than emotion.
In the English language, I have not found it. And all the people who have spoken to in English language experts have not found it.
I'm sure that's right. Is it one of the American Times books?
It is as I'm telling you. We haven't found it. We haven't found it. If someone wants to make up a meaning, then that's a different issue. If they want to make up a meaning and say it can work somehow, or let's say even if there was a meaning, where's the mercy on the people? How can you guarantee that because of this thing that I've translated or we've agreed upon, someone won't misunderstand? But you could say that about anything in one sense. But this word, it actually has that very strong connotation of emotion. So let's say it did. Why would we use it?
No.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Well, have you seen it in the American Times?
No, I'm hearing it from you.
Oh, right. There is. Because they don't use emotion.
Okay, so we'll stop here inshallah. Let's say La ilaha illallah and as-salah ala nabi. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.